now start the recording. So I hope this worked. You might get some notification that I'm recording right now. So it would be great if you could just click OK. Yeah, other than that, I would like to welcome you today and would first like to start and report a bit on our current status. In order to do this, I will share my screen right now to not get too much time from you. So yeah, today we want to make an open door meeting. So basically try to get also a bit of feedback from outside of TA1. So what is our current status? This is what I wanted to present you first. So currently we have so far gathered some vocabulary. So we gathered concepts based on what we called concept tables, where we set out for some subdomains of catalysis research and try to list all the important concepts that are existent in our specific fields of research. Because we have seen that we might need a vocabulary as a backbone of ontologies. And this is not yet really existing for the catalysis domain. So we set out and started gathering concepts and gathered approximately 2,500 concepts in our subgroups. And we also installed a Git CI pipeline that allows for versioning control and for an automated creation of these concepts into a so-called turtle file, which is basically a SCOS hierarchical file where we can list whether or not a concept is broader or narrower to another concept and list this all in a more machine-readable way than an Excel file would be. And our next steps would be to normalize these concepts where we want to revise whether or not we have maybe duplicate preferred labels and focus a bit more on these broader and narrower classes in order broader and narrower relations for the classes in order to get a first taxonomy for our TA1. So this is one of our outputs so far. And what we also have done so far is, or what is currently under work is our vocabulary guideline for catalysis, where Nikos is currently working most on it, I would say, but he's not there today because he has to do a lecture. But nevertheless, this is used or intended to be used as a guideline to unify our vocabulary. And our first version of this will be published soon, we hope. As of now, we are revising it. And what we also did was to program some natural language programming based word extraction tools that helped us in getting the concepts still missing in our vocabularies. So what is also our current work? We have taken some semantic considerations where we set out and said, okay, we might have some ontologies present, but none of them are covering our catalysis field in detail. So what do we want to do? Maybe we now decided that we want to take a modular approach, basically cropping off the classes from the ontologies that are already existent that we need in order to describe a small use case, and then build for each use case an own ontology dynamically. And thus we try to make different granularities possible. And in the end, if we succeed, we have some kind of an ontology for cut where also classes can be used for each use case. And another thing that is presented also later in another presentation by, I think, Taras and Nadia, is the setup of some metadata-centered ontologies according to some use cases with some kind of a prototype metadata ontology that is in turn aligned with an NFDI for ing ontology that is already developed. And for our now currently working status, so to say, is we have set up now for new subgroups that should tackle the three things I've told you before. So for once, we want to have a subgroup, or we have set up a subgroup for vocabulary curation to deploy those vocabulary for cut guidelines on our vocabulary and to make our vocabulary more sophisticated. On the other hand, we started to set out a semantic experts work group to foster the expressivity from the ontologies, because we noticed that not only listing those classes is important, but also to have an expressive definition of the relations between classes is important too. And last but not least, we have the subgroup of ontology software engineering now, in order to develop helping tools such like this NLP-based term extractor tool I presented you earlier, where we want to try and gather software that can assist us in setting up ontologies. And yeah, we set out to do this, and yeah, as you can see, we have just set out to do to meet up in new subgroups. So we tried to have the first meetings of these subgroups in December 22, and we'll report on our normal monthly meeting in January 2023, where each of the subgroup leaders will give a short report on what the current status is. Next thing would be that we also decided to set up some task forces where we try to attack more narrow topics, I would say. So for example, decide which persistent identifiers we want to use and how they should be set up and so on. Also to do some data curation of the use cases we have proposed earlier in our project, and which metadata and which data can be used there. And also to set up a ontology world map, as we called it, where we classify the ontologies and revise a classification of ontologies we have already done in order to have a more, a better view on the ontologies we are trying to focus at in TA1. There also we try to meet during this month, and in the next meeting in January 23, try to report on our first results, and yeah, in this way proceed further on with our task area. So with this, I would like to close, and yeah, would like to ask for questions. And thank you. So I mean, if there are no questions, it's even better, because then Mohammed.
Now this is awkward. Maybe I could just quick question in your last slide, the task force or data curation of use cases. I just wanted to ask who would be the contact person there, because I'm sure we can benefit from reuse of what you guys have done or are working on there.
I think Taras. Taras, you are muted now. Still not understandable, but Taras is the contact person.
Okay.
Maybe if the mic is not working properly, then I can send you his email address, and then you can.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Here you have the example of the symmetric relation. It's not only you who would profit from our examples, but we also would profit and would like to profit from your examples as well. So, and I'm a contact person on this topic, and I suggest that we can discuss about this in more detail after my presentation, because what we actually want to do will get more clear after the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, if there are no further questions, then I would like to give the stage to Amalie Vang Høst. I hope I pronounced this right. She will give us a small talk on ontologies in biocatalysis, or metadata in biocatalysis.
Yes, thank you. I think I can share my screen. Yes.
Seems to work.
Yeah, I almost happily forgot about all this Zoom. Okay, yes. Well, thank you for the introduction, and I think you pronounced my last name okay. Also, thank you for inviting me to this meeting here. And yes, today I will talk to you a little about the ontologies for biocatalysis and how we can link this to enzyme stability. So I know there's a lot of people with different backgrounds here, also in the field of biocatalysis. So I think it could be nice with just a very short introduction about me. The short story is that I am a chemical engineer from the Technical University in Denmark, and that's also where I am doing my PhD now, together with John Woodley. Today I will talk to you about, yes, the ontology for biocatalysis, how we can link metadata to stability, and also how we can kind of design a process for biocatalysis. So why is it important to be talking about enzymes? Well, because they are a very sustainable solution. They're active under mild conditions, meaning that we require less water and less energy, which is especially important in these times. They are biodegradable, so when we're done working with them, after deactivating them, we can just throw them away. And then I like this this graph that the Novozymes in Denmark made, where they say how much CO2 is being reduced by using 1 kilogram of enzymes in different industries. And as you can see, using enzymes in a catalytic system is the second highest. Again, emphasizing why enzymes are so great. There's a lot of drawbacks for chemical catalysts. An enzyme holds a great potential to replace most of the chemical catalysts in the industry today, but there's a big drawback for enzymes, and that is the poor stability under industrial conditions. There's a lot of things that can deactivate enzymes, mostly when they are in contact with this gas-liquid interface that we are creating when we are sparking air to a system. And I will come back to this in a little bit. One of the philosophies that we are working with is this whole what happens when we go from industrial scale to the industry. When we're working on a laboratory scale, we are mostly focusing on temperature, pH, and also the solvent. But then when we go to the industry, we are working in reactors. It could be a stirred tank reactor like this. And now we also have a lot of other conditions affecting the enzyme stability. And that's exactly what we are working with in my project. It's called FluiZyme. It's a project running over 5 years, funded by the ERC. We are working with more fundamental research where we are trying to investigate and understand enzyme stability under different conditions. And now I've said enzyme stability a million times, but what is it actually? If you do a quick Google search, it says that it's the enzyme's capacity to retain the structure after some forces, for example, the temperature. We say in our project that it's the loss of activity over time. And then we describe it by looking at the half-life of the enzyme or the deactivation constant for the enzyme. And how can we quantify this, and also what kind of data are required? Well, there's a lot of discussion going on right now, whether it's first order deactivation or if this is a two-stage deactivation. And we saw it at DTU, and I know that Andy Bomaria's group at Georgia Tech, they also saw this two-stage, where in the beginning there's one deactivation rate, and then after some time it changes. So we're also now in discussion with them about should it be one stage or two stage. We know that this deactivation constant is depending on the temperature, but I also say that it's depending on other conditions. And now we're also trying to find like a standard way that we can analyze all of this. But to do that, we need more data. And then I tried to formulate or define an ontology for biocatalysis. What we want to do is that we want to design processes for biocatalysis. We want to link the data to the stability. And the way that we're doing it is that we're trying to measure this deactivation constant, KD, that I talked about, also the melting temperature, but also if the enzymes that you're working with is being inhibited by the substrate or the product, because that also is very important when you talk about the reactor design. And then again, just some of the properties that we have that we are investigating in our group. So how can we describe this so that it's comparable if you work on 1 liter or 300 liter? And then what we like to talk about a lot in our group is this power input number. The power input number is a way that we can talk about the sizes of the reactor. So it's a function of a power number, but also the steering speed and also the sizes of the impellers you use. The power number, to make it even more confusing, is also a function of the Reynolds number. A good rule of thumb is that it's 5 if you use it in a stirred tank reactor and you use a Ruston turbine impeller. Then we also have this aeration number here, which is also a function of the aeration flow, again, the steering speed, and also the size of the bioreactor we're working in. And then a little about my case study. I am working with an HMF oxidase. It's a monomer. It's a purified enzyme. It's an oxygen-dependent enzyme, so it catalyzes the oxidation of HMF to FDCA. It's very interesting to be working with this because it requires oxygen to do a reaction, but if there's oxygen present in the reactor creating this gas-liquid interface that I showed you, the bubble before, it deactivates the enzyme. So it's super interesting to be working with it because there is this trade-off. And how do we measure this? Well, we are not interested in the reaction. We are interested in the enzyme. So what we do is that we add enzyme and water in a reactor, and then we expose it to one of these conditions. It could be just the steering speed at 200 RPM, or 400 RPM, or also aeration. Then we take a sample over a time series, and then we analyze it by running this reaction. And this is happening very fast, so we call it initial activity. And this is also a thing that we need to consider. What do we mean when we say initial activity? We mean that it's the first 60 seconds of the reaction from I mix it, from I add it to the cuvette until I put it in the spec, and then we measure the first minute of the reaction. For the HMF oxidase, it's a very unstable enzyme, so I decided to run the experiments at the 25 degrees, and I think this is also a good standard temperature. And then, as I mentioned before, if we only look at the power number and we only look at it without the aeration, but only the steering speed, we can actually see that that also has dramatic effects on the activity. So going from here, I have 400 rotation per minute, and here I have 600 rotation per minute. It's not a big difference, but if we look at the enzyme and the half-life of this, it's a lot that's happening. Then I also wanted to add oxygen and air because of this trade-off. And what is super interesting here is that it looks like my enzyme actually favors oxygen instead of air. But we had this hypothesis saying that too much oxygen in the system would over-oxidize some of the amino acids in the sequence, and then it would change the structure. But we actually see that it's more damaging for the enzyme to have air. And this is super interesting, and I don't know why this is happening. Again, if we turn on the steering speed, so it mixes faster, then again we can see that the deactivation is faster. So this hypothesis is okay. Then I also tried to look at my data to see, okay, is it 1 or 2 stage? And I know it's not okay to do a linear regression only using 2 data points, but I just really wanted to try to see if it's 2 stage, but it's not. I think it's fair to assume that here for my enzyme, everything is linear. It's first order deactivation. So we only have 1 deactivation constant for this enzyme. Then I also tried to look into this power number per volume or the aeration number, trying to find some kind of relation between them. And if I look at only the steering, we can see that a higher power number, thus having a faster steering, gives a faster deactivation. That part makes sense. But if I combine it all together, it doesn't really give a story that I can tell. And I think one of the things here is that we need more data, but we also need to look into if this power number is really the way to get some kind of standard or normalized data. Then I also looked, if we only look at this last part of the equation, the aeration number, if we distinguish between using air or oxygen, there's actually, it looks like there's a relation here. So a higher aeration number, meaning that we have more oxygen in the system, is actually causing a faster deactivation. So maybe this is the relation here. But that's still a thing that we're looking into. Then I also did this very interesting case study where I'm trying to compare a wild type and a more thermostable mutant. The mutations here, so the protein engineering, is only done trying to increase the melting temperature. And then I asked myself if having a more thermostable mutant also means that it's more stable to other conditions. And the findings here are super, super interesting, because when we look here, this is the residual activity. We start at 100%, and then over time it decreases. For the wild type, we can see that what is causing the fastest deactivation is having a high gas flow. But for the mutant, it's the size of the bubble that matters. How I did this in practice is just that I changed the spatcher to a spatcher with smaller pore size, thus creating smaller bubbles. And then it seems like this mutant is getting deactivated by increasing this contact area between bubble and enzyme. What is even more interesting is that when we look at the specific activity, because if we go back here, yes, there's different factors affecting them, but it looks like the activity is more or less the same. But when we look at the residual specific activity, where we divide the activity by the concentration of the protein, we can see that now the mutant is much more stable, or it's active for longer at least. What is also super interesting, which I have no explanation for yet, is this increase of the activity in the beginning. It's super interesting, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So if you have any suggestion, please enlighten me. Yes, what we saw for the mutant is that a lot of foam is being created when we add bubbles. So it's also a big discussion. When is an enzyme more stable? Is the wild type more stable because the concentration of the protein remains more or less the same? So it's stable in the sense that it's in the reactor? Or is it the mutant which is active for longer, but the concentration is gone, so it's participating from the solution? And then I am still trying to find a standard way that we can test enzymes so that we can compare them. In addition to looking into these industrial representative conditions, such as the steering speed and the gas flow, but also the size of the bubbles, I also think it's super interesting to try to look into some other things, especially to see if we can explain this increasing in the activity by doing an SDS page, or look at some of the changes that's happening to the enzyme. And then I talked about this a little before. We have a cooperation with EnzymeML, where we were talking about that it could be super interesting if we could set up some kind of stress test for all enzymes and link that data to stability. So maybe it should be this power number, maybe it should just be aeration, maybe it should be in a stirred tank reactor, or maybe it should be in another type of reactor. So yes, to summarize, we are trying to design process for biocatalysis. We're trying to link the data together with stability and then to describe and understand how the stability of the enzyme is. And then I still have these questions about whether we should use the power number and also if it's fair to assume that it's first order. And yes, with that, I would like to say thank you. Also, thank you to my team at home.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting talk.
Thank you.
I would like to ask a question to the audience. Are there any questions? If yes, then please raise the hand or unmute yourself. I think with just 20 participants should be enough. Not also Mr. Linke wrote in the, Mr. Linke, okay.
Yeah, I can see there's some.
You're still muted. Yeah, he is, but I think he will tell you about this.
Yes, so about describing mixing or stirring, there was a lot of work done by Marco Slokanik. He was a professor of me in University of Cologne, and he was a chemical engineer responsible for all kind of mixing in Bayer AG, so in the company. And they invented this big biological wastewater treatment, and he was the one responsible for designing this aeration and so on. And he developed a lot of chemical engineering methods to describe mixing and gas distribution in liquids and all this. So maybe you can find something interesting in his work.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Thank you, yeah.
Great. So if there's no other question, I would like to have a question too.
Yes.
You mentioned that you have, in coordination with Mr. Pleiss together, you have set up some EnzymeML documents.
Yes.
Is the data available, not public, but maybe would you send it to us in TA1 that we can maybe use it for our own purposes? Or is it closed data?
Yes, I can send. Well, I'm actually working on a publication for it soon. I hope to hand it in or to submit it here in December. But I think it's okay if I send my data to you.
Okay.
Also, the data that I think you can already access the one for the documents for EnzymeML. Yeah.
We have it as a with a DUI. So I
think
okay. Then
yes. I think I got an email once saying that my data was now published. Yeah. So it's somewhere.
The paper is almost our paper, our joint paper with 25 authors. It's almost accepted. So,
okay.
Yeah.
It always takes a little bit of time. So yeah, but this data set is available. And Amalie, I think we should really go forward with what you suggested in a bigger study and using the structured data for a large scale.
Yes.
I mean, that would be also a nice study, I think, to demonstrate that research data management allows to scale the whole experimental setup and results. Yeah.
That sounds great, because I'm just starting a master thesis on how to include data from EnzymeML in a process simulation software, and having more data always helps to set up a more robust code behind it.
Yes.
So this would help big. Thank you.
Yes, of course, but that could be, it's also nice to get our data out there and to see that more people can use it and yes.
Great, then I'd suggest we stay in contact even after this meeting.
Definitely,
Sounds
definitely.
great.
Yes.
Good, thank you. Okay,
thank you.
If there are no further questions, then thank you again for this nice talk. And next on stage would be Nadia or Taras. I expect Taras to be presenting. But you are still muted. Yep, there you are.
Yep. So we have a joint presentation. So can I share my screen?
Hopefully.
share the screen. No. So you see the title of the talk, yeah?
Yes.
So it's our joint presentation with Nadia. So it's about some important aspects of the NFDI for CAT ontology and metadata design. So as we see, there are numerous efforts in the development of metadata, standards and domain ontologies. At the same time, the advantages offered by an optimal interplay of the developing of the metadata standards and domain ontologies for the implementation of the FAIR principles are not really well understood, or seem not to be well understood yet. So in our approach, you see the next slide, I hope. Yeah. In our approach, in our approach, this interplay is achieved through a detailed documentation of the various use cases. And these use cases would represent various workflows related to the catalysis in general. For more intuitive comprehension, I would like to say that there is a useful analogy in which ontology is an ordinary language, and the use cases are just various life situations. For some very simple scenarios, like in the childhood, so the keyword or key value representation of the reality seems to be sufficient, but in general, one has to train the expressiveness of the language by going through a large number of various life situations. So suppose that we have a provisional ontology that is capable to represent or adequately describe some use cases. And we add new cases into considerations. Some facts from the new use case can be described by means of the provisional ontology, but some cannot be. So if for some facts or resource classes or properties, this is not possible, then the ontology should be revised. So this task in general have following intermediates, like first, first this is the semi-formal RDF representation of the workflow, and that means that the facts which can be described within the provisional ontology are represented in a formal way, entirely formal way, and the facts which are cannot represented, they are given in kind of using natural language representation, but also in RDF format. And this is something which is important, like to have to think about. So then in this way we can identify the missing concepts and relations, so missing expressivity in the ontology. So then this these drawbacks or like missing facts can be missing expressivity can be further discussed in the circle of semantic experts. So one can search for appropriate terms, entities in the external ontologies and vocabularies. And in this way, the provisional ontology and the respective vocabulary can be further revised. This process can iterate like until ideally we can cover all possible use cases. So as soon as I started to develop local ontology covering some prototype workflows, a number of open issues. First, what would be the overall structure of the metadata? And what is the structure and assignment, how to make assignment of the uniform resource identifiers, and to make in general way, because RDF, actually all resources presented in RDF files, they are ORIs, and one has to think of a general scheme. And what would be a general way for the representation of the complex and diverse workflows, because it's especially important for the catalysis. So in catalysis, for example, many substances, compounds have unknown structure, and to make the experiments fully reproducible, you need, so if the initial conditions are known, so you have to provide like all necessary details of workflows. So then also the quite general problem, how to avoid tedious collection of metadata, because I mean, if the burden of collecting metadata is too high, it will not be accepted by the community. And also how to make the to ensure the user invariance of the collected metadata, so at least in a semantic sense, at least semantic invariance, so that and there are also some general issues like designing subsumption relations ontology, determining whether to design a term as a class or as property, so and so on. So some few words for in the ideal reality, our ontology would be first of all metadata oriented. So that means it should be capable to describe research workflows. So it can also involve many entities related to a general knowledge presentation, but it has like in at least the main goal of our consortium seems to be to create metadata-oriented ontology. So that's me. So it should be suitable for the representation of the research workflows. So and suitable for semantic query according to the workflow patterns, and it should correspond to the interest of all participants making use of this ontology, starting from the scientists curating the data and metadata on the stage where he creates the metadata, and then scientists who search for appropriate data, scientists who tries to navigate, like to follow the to follow the links in the like which tries to follow like jump between different sets of metadata. So let me move further. So we pursue a general metadata model in which all metadata are represented as instances of appropriate ontology classes or their properties. They can be like in particular for metadata related properties. So it is useful to create the super properties like metadata, metadata property, and metadata object property. The first one relates class to a value. The second relates instance of class A to an instance of class B. So, and if we subsume properties like data property 1 or object property 1 to respective metadata properties, then that means that these providing information, like like providing the values for the data property 1 and describing the resource of class B, so related to the class E by means of the metadata object property. So that means that this property then in this case, the corresponding properties, the values representing these properties are mandatory. So in designing the ontology, it is also very useful to pursue. So in design the ontology, it is very useful to pursue the principles of inheritance and modularity. So modularity, that means that all ontology, all expansions of the ontology can be are independent. So in particular, one can create a substance-related ontology or the spectroscopy-related ontology, which is fully independent, can be just imported to the main ontology. Then also it is useful for represented complex relations. It is useful to use semantic design patterns, so-called n-area relations. So, but this is not the topic of this talk. So that means, then another useful feature is the intrinsic polymorphism. Of the ontology. So in the programming, the polymorphism is the provision of a single interface to the entities of different types. And this, for example, if some object property which relates classes A and B, this general property is used for all subclasses of class class B. And for example, if object property is metadata object property, then the inquiry for the metadata goes downwise. So the user is asked, so whether you have a class C1, C2, or C3. And then he has a choice, like in the end, the user has all the choice among the classes D1, D2, D3, D4, D5, and C3. So that means that the metadata, that range of properties representing data within a domain-specific model should be represented using the most general class, while only the most specific classes should be used to instantiate the data. Just a few words about metadata for Inc ontology, and this is what our colleagues, NFDI colleagues from the NFDI for Inc consortium has recently implemented, and the first version of the metadata for Inc ontology is already there. And we believe that this can be very useful top-level ontology, which would framework the entities in NFDI for cat ontology and provide like the basic terms and ingredients like the processing step, method, tool, properties, has input, has output. Part of actually it involves a lot of terms from the other top level ontologies, and it was very careful work in like designing like the most appropriate solution. But we also see that there is a need to adapt this ontology to our needs. So the next step, so there's in this respect, I mean, it's also useful concept is so-called processing model. So in a metadata for Inc ontology, processing step is defined as a specific action undertaken during the research. And we defined a processing model to be a subclass of the processing step. And it is defined as a distinct assembly of specific actions that can be removed or replaced in a larger processing step. The point that it's still provisional definition, but it's on the same way it can be used very intuitive way. So there are, in general, unit operation, physical measurement, data processing, processing modules, and so on and so forth. And the research step class is defined, also useful entity is defined as the subclass of the processing step, which has the property has processing module. The property which indicates the number of the processing module in a given research step. So here's the example of the toluene hydroalkylation, prototypical example of the toluene hydroalkylation process. It consists of a number of processing modules related to the storage, transfer of different substances, liquid gas separation, mixed liquid separation, and so on. The general logic, So now we have that. So here's the snippet of the metadata file. This is where we have. So we make an instance of the class research step. So, and say here that research step has 14 processing modules, and then we also like kind of declare those modules. So say that we have a number of certain number of modules, and here here's the example of the module specification related to the for the module module on the benzene production. So here research step has processing module has for example 3 subclasses: unit operation, physical measurements module, or data processing module, and the researcher choose that this is unit operation module. In this way we say, okay, processing module 5 is a unit operation module, and then unit operation module should has unit operation property, and if it has unit operation property, then the user has to choose which unit operations are there. So, and if you choose that there is a mixing property, so that you have to provide which subclass this is mixing magnetic or this is mixing manual, and in case this is magnetic mixing, you have to go so say that this is magnetic mixing, and you have to provide mandatory the values for the mandatory properties, mixing device and mixing magnetic rate. So because they are supposed to be sub-properties of the metadata property. So this is the snippet of the metadata corresponding to the benzene production module. And of course there are a lot of fields, and this is not about like which exactly metadata we are using. It's only about how we organize them in general, like the way how to be approached this. And also like once the ontology is ready, so such things can be created, the entire snippet can be created in actually automatic fashion. So that means that user should not type in all this information, and that it can be done programmatically. So, and in the end it shouldn't be more complicated than filling the ELSTA formula. Of course, it can be more lengthy, but not more complex. So also just few remarks about the metaset. So it's also like general, its metaset is a collection of RDF statements representing the metadata for a given research step. So each metaset has its own URI. It can be serialized into files or graphs in a triple store, and at his own URI of the form, of the general form, which can meet all the requirements, and also all the resources specified within this meta set have their own URIs, like with this so-called hash URI. So that means that the instance of the class name would have kind of this form of the URI in general, and this is kind of although for example, like there is a common situation that you have ID like PID for a sample, and this PID is used by all the researchers in reference to this sample, but this ID is capable like to go like to have more complete provenance record, because it can distinguish between different phases of this sample: before this measurement, after this measurement, before purification, after purification. So it can fully reproduce. It can reproduce the entire history of the sample, for example. So, and then it's also the last but not the least, that this straightforward navigation between metaset would be very useful. Once we mention in one metaset one, for example, the resources defined in other metasets, so that means this would open the way for efficient navigations between metasets, the way like we do it between the web documents. So, and now a few words from Nadia.
Yeah, good afternoon to everybody. Sorry for being with camera. It doesn't work properly today, but I just want to say a few words about maybe applied part of this work, because a few months ago I asked in my subgroup to provide us some use cases which we can use for this approach which Taras just presented. And there was one use case from LICAT. It was provided by Vihvas, and it's a use case on ligand preparation, and it was provided in a text form. So what this idea is to take the whole procedure of this description and distinguish it into the research steps, and then work for each research step separately. And next step is to split this research step into processing models, and no, Taras, it's okay, yeah, to split it into processing models and describe each of the processing model corresponding to this NFDI for ink, so using as basement this NFDI for ink ontology. So yeah, and after each involved unit operation is specified, we would like to present the information in the total file. An example of this total file, which I prepared for this use case, is on the next slide. Yeah, so for myself, I split it into 3 big groups. The first one is responsible for the processing model itself. So here you can see that all the unit operations are listed. Then also all the substances which are involved. And as a result of chemical reactions which occur, there are some mixtures also listed. The next block, it's a description of unit operation itself, where it's written which kind of operation it is it heating, cooling, and so on. If information of duration of this unit operation, or for example, conditions like operating conditions like a temperature, or maybe yeah, so mixing duration or whatever is provided, we also have to include it. And the last part is on the next slide. There we can see information on substances. So I used this reference label to name all the substances which involved, but also as identifier for each of the substance, I used INCHI key. So I found it, this information just included here. Then also there is opportunity to list all the properties which are given, for example, chemical formula or physical weight or molar weight or whatever what is known for us. And of course, when we look in this Turtle file, it's not good visualized. So we need some kind of visualization, and I think we will work on it in the future. So for today, I made this scheme from the next slide, and yeah, there is a schematic representation of the processing model number 1. So here you can see all the unit operations which are happening during this processing model and all the substances which are involved. The interesting thing that I tried to prepare this timescale which shows duration of each operation. And sometimes here it's maybe not a very good example because it's not seen that for some of the, for example, of the first heating unit operation, there was no provided information of how long this heating is happening. So from such representation, it's clear for us which information is missing. Yeah, so as you can see at the beginning, this is also open question how to call this initial charging of the reactor or initial mixing. So when we add the initial compounds into the reaction, this we also will think in future. But from this schematic representation, we can see what happens, which steps are done, and what we get as a result. For example, after this second unit operation, which is mixing under heating conditions, there's also some Grigand reagent is formed, and you can see it from here. And coming back to this research step, there are other processing models, which are also should be listed. So for that, I made an additional diagram where you can see that this research step is separated into different processing models, and each of them should be described in such a way. So in the last slide, it's clear that there is also some next actions are done in order to get final results. So I think for the next tasks for me, it will be to describe in detail additional processing models and come to the next research steps. And to summarize it, it's a bit, it requires a lot of effort to describe all those processing model and provide all this information on metadata and so on. But as Taras already mentioned during his presentation, it will be not required from the user. So it will be kind of automatization of this process, but to collect information and to know what we need to ask user, we need to do it. So it's a work which needs to be done just to get a feeling how does it work. Yeah, so I think there also maybe one thing which should be mentioned in the end, that there is a need for additional, so for coming use cases which we can also use and work on them in such a way. And yeah, if Taras wants to add something for me, so I'm fine. If there are some questions, I will happy to answer.
Yeah, it's just a comment. It's just a visualization of the approach. It's not about which metadata to which granularity we are gonna represent. So all such things should be like decided together. But so we need to have kind of library of use cases which would eventually give rise and shape our ontology. So, so also one thing, for example, in the course of the use case treatment, for example, you encounter some resource. So, and you know, you understand you have to find the way to describe that. So by means of certain class in ontology. So precisely at this moment, you can identify so the number of sibling classes So you encounter like, roughly speaking, you have absorption spectrum, you have to describe it. Okay, so if you have exposure spectrum, you have to provide appropriate classes for it. So it means you have to create sibling classes related to the NMR, IR, EPR, and so on, and other absorption spectroscopy methods. So this is it.
So thank you very much for this very interesting insights. Mr. Linker has a question.
Yes, and for example, you have shown wishbash synthesis recipe, but in practice, often you have recipes which are saying something like mix it in a ratio 2:1, for example, but there's no volume given exactly. And so which means you have kind of a plan, which you probably have to represent. And then you have the reality where someone uses 100 milliliters plus 50 milliliters.
Yeah, yes.
Have you thought about the discrimination between plan and so like set point and process value? So these different things, what is planned and what is actually done?
Yeah, yeah, we can make this. I don't think that it will be a problem to make corresponding ontology entities. So one can do that. So
is it included, Taras? Is it included in the NFDI for Inc. ontology? This kind of separation?
No. This is like too specific for the NFDI for Inc. ontology. So this.
But even in a technical reactor, it's even more important. You say 200 degree set point, but it has just 180 or 195.
Yeah, it should be NFDI for Inc. is top level. Is top level ontology.
Okay.
I believe this.
So
it's
has
top
to go
level
down.
ontology. Yeah. And for NFDI for CAT, I believe we can do that with relatively simple constructs. It's not a big deal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pleiss has another question.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. And I'm just wondering, a very interesting presentation of Nadia. Thanks for this application. I understood that you derive this sort of unit operations, information about unit operations and the sequence of them from free text, essentially.
Yeah.
Do you also consider, say, input by electronic lab notebooks or LabVIEW or other tools that are already available to describe processes and reactor setups?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it would be possible to do this, but for this we need to have such use cases, because so far I cannot say how information is introduced in the, for example, in the output of electronic lab notebooks. And when I can see this, I think we can also work on that. And even maybe it would be easier to make it to automatize it.
So maybe asking the question is like a different way: with which electronic lab notebooks or tools are you collaborating for extracting data, apart from using text, free text, as you have presented?
So I did not use any electronic lab notebooks because I don't work with the experimental part. But I think maybe it's a question for our colleagues who are involved in this process and who provides me this information on use cases.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and there should be kind of interface to the semantic layer for the metadata, so common interface which can be used by all lab notebooks. So it should also like function in both directions. So
yeah, if there are no further questions left, I would like to thank you again for the nice presentation, both of you. And now we are also coming to our last presentation, which is from Manal. She wants to summarize her work she has done so far in NFDI for CAT. because unfortunately she's leaving at the end of this year to go for another project. So yeah, Manal, thank you for having us, and please share the screen.
Just a sec.
Maybe Taras, you have to stop screen sharing first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, okay, sorry. How I reused the basic formal ontology to model the reactor engineering domain using visualizing the categories of the presentation according to the periphery tree. This is the content of the agenda, and due to the interdisciplinarity and for clarity, you will see the parts of this agenda frequently during the presentation to keep track of the different ideas and to avoid confusion. To start with reactor, it's the heart of chemical engineering. It's where chemical reaction takes place. It's where the feedstock converts into the desired product according to energy and matter conversion laws. Here comes ontology as one of two shifting elements towards our target of our project, which is digitalization. What we are exactly doing, we are trying to create a computable lexicon, could be used by man and machine, using OWL and taking the advantages of a Protege as a software tool to model the reactor as a hardware tool, taking into account that regardless how much our model could be close from the reality of the reactor, it will be just an imitation. It will be, of course, wrong. It could be useful. In computer science, ontology has a non-definition by the community, and what is really interesting is to know what is the ontology life cycle. It consists of the building, maintaining, and evaluating. It's the most time-consuming element. Maintaining is necessary to keep the value of ontology. Evaluating, it's very important, but at the same time, it's very difficult. To start with ontology building, the designer must carefully select ontology, the methodology of designing. As I know, there are 3 methodologies. I selected here 2 to present today. After selecting the building, the designer will go through the phases of the building. Also, these phases are sequenced according to the flow of the building. This building, which has 3 essential blocks, and these blocks could confirm the ceiling of the building, which is terminological knowledge, and the floor of it, which is the assertive knowledge. For instance, the reactor is a general concept in the domain of chemical reactor engineering. However, the batch reactor is an individual, it's an instance of the reactor. Coming to the ontology evaluation, as I have mentioned, it's necessary. However, it's difficult because we need the versatility that could embrace all these aspects of evaluation. Now, maintaining the ontology. When we maintain ontology where update takes place, where changes also takes place regarding the data and the data systems. The designer must be careful to avoid the failure syndromes of the ontology and try to obtain the success keys of it. For example, one of the success keys is the hub and spokes approach, which is clarified in this figure here. And also, if he is mighty to follow the approach of the virtuous snowball effect. According to artificial intelligence, what exists is what we can represent. That's why BFO consists of continuant and occurrent. What does that mean? Continuant is what exists in time, like the reactor, which has a three dimensions, sorry. And the occurrent, which occurs in time, like the reaction, which process, which is four-dimensional. What encouraged me to reuse BFO, that it was reused by 300 ontologies. This is the first table that I created according to the BFO essential categories here, as it's shown on the top right corner, taking into account at the same time the traffic rule, which states that all the terms must be singular. What are the reusing aspects? For example, let's take specifically dependence on the reactor volume, specifically depends on the reactor. Here also, process depends on a participant. The catalytic reaction depends on the catalyst. Also, the participates on, there's a thing part in a process. The reactant participates in the reaction. Coming to the realizable dependent continuants, like role, function, dispositions. Examples are Buller, cooling, thermal conductivity. Why they are called like that? Because they are realized through undergoing the process. Now, coming to the generically dependent continuants. Here, copability appears. For example, if I take the PDF file I can have on my laptop, if the bearer of this, the bearer which is the laptop of the information could be lost, maybe I can have another copy of it. This is what's mean by copability. There is also, it's worthy to mention, the concretized in specifically dependent continuants. What's meant by that? It's meant, for example, the plans, the laws, the protocols. For example, the plan I can have in my head, the laws could be, for example, energy laws or other things like that, which could be related to chemical engineering, could be implemented in the process. It's very worthy to distinguish between the three essential terms: disposition, capability, and function, to avoid confusion. For example, the reactor has the disposition of conversion. It has the capability of steering here, as we see, but it's not its function to steer. It's the function of the steering blades that it has. Another example, the isolated reactors, as it's seen here, capable of thermal isolation, but it's the function of the isolation materials to thermally isolate. Why it's important? It's important because of the key role that the design plays, especially when it comes to economical and safety consideration. The chemical engineering in general is based on two pillars: the reaction analysis and the reactor design, where here my focus is. This in turn, the reactor design also is based on two pillars: the physical configuration of the reactor and the mode of operation. And inside of these two pillars, the most optimization operations must take place. Of course, to design the reactor, I need data. And what are the sources of these data? They are here represented as follows. And what can I get from them? I can get from them insights into operability, reliability, and safety of operation. The chemical engineer takes many considerations into account starting from the physical configurations and the mode of operation, as we mentioned, to be the two essential pillars of reactor design, and the related issues which could be based also on them, like, for example, the performance, the cost, profitability, safety, and other issues. There are many parameters could be point of interest for the chemical engineer, but let's just mention here the rate of reaction expression and the laws of conversion. The rate of reaction or rate of reaction tells us how fast the reaction proceeds, and it's concerning the temperature and the composition concentration and the pressure. Now, coming to how can I measure the performance of the reactor to design it well, conversion and selectivity and yield are the most important performance measurements, and they are essentially related to the reactant, main product, byproduct. Here, as we spoke about rate of reaction, it's necessary to mention that the laws of conversion drive us to reach the reactor equations design. These the design equations are available in the references, and what drew my attention here, and as I now noted in Amalie's presentation, the use of units to design well, to describe, for example, I need the time in the batch reactor, I need the volume of catalyst in catalytic reactions. That's why I designed the second table, which is related to the design, to quantify the units that I need. For example, I need the second in the batch reactor. I need the Kelvin, because temperature is very important in rate reaction. I need the mole for concentrations to know the concentration of the composition. The catal is very important when it comes to the catalyst activity to describe the catalytic reactions. And I took that the second table, I created an ontology related to it. This is just very simple part of it, which is the basic units. It's not all the table. And here how I annotated the data, how I created the relations between them. For example, when I see that the kilogram is what it's simple, what is the quantity that it measures. And here also maybe it will be seen how these essential building blocks were used regarding classes, individuals, mentioning relations, data properties, and also objective properties. Also, as knowledge ontology is knowledge presentation. Ontology also can be presented visually by using either, for example, ontograph or web vowel. Both are visualizations tools, but what attracted me here that I can get, for example, metadata. I can know immediately the number of classes that I had used, also the number of objective properties. The third table, which I was created, it's related to the reactor design only. I selected this methodology 101, and I followed this sequence as it appears here in the sheets of the Excel file. I gathered the terms in the first sheet, the definitions in the second sheet, the relations in the third one, the synonyms here in the fourth. But what is most important was gathering competency questions, which I took from this reference regarding reactor design here. And these are very important to be answered while I am building my ontology. As all know that, of course, the reactor is the container where the reactants converge reactant converts. That's why it's necessary to be able to describe well the whole process. Reactant converts in reaction. I need also to describe somehow the reactant as a matter. Also, I created a third table, gathered them here, approximately the same classification, because I need to know, for example, let me take this instance here. For example, the boiling point and the melting point are very important to let me avoid the side reactions, which I need to follow the best reaction pathway to get just the desired reaction. Here's the ontology that was created. For example, I divided the matter, not I divided, according to the references, the matter is divided to element, mixture, compound, the compounds in organic. Here also the mixtures, grainy solution, colloid, the elements, metal, non-metal, metalloid. This is the essential division of the matter that could enter the reactor. To wrap up, these are the three tables that I had created. Of course, ontology is used to create, our language is used to create the ontology, which will help our machines to be able finally to read and understand. And I hope that these tables could be like 3 lines, could be written in the computable lexicon, which is our target. For future, I recommend if someone comes and takes over, if these tables could be somehow, I don't know now how gathered, because ontologies could be gathered, to gather them using the hub and the spokes approach. I'd like to mention from my very humble and simple experience with BFO that BFO is not complete at all. Ontologies could be edited, and this format is recommended to, for engineers who edit the ontology. I would like to recommend to look at meta-ontology, which could be, not evaluate, could be able to evaluate, according to the recent researches, could be able to evaluate the ontology. Sorry. Here, some are of the reference that I used. Of course, this is how, this is what I achieved in task area number 1, where I used the same visualization which was used in the tree of knowledge of Aristotle. And I would like to wish the task area number 1 members Merry Christmas time. And because now it's time to say goodbye. And I hope that to be interesting reactor regarding my presentation, and to react by raising your questions that I wait. And I'd like to thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Thank you for all.
Applause.
Maybe I have a question.
Yes, yes, please.
So in comparison to the slides before from Taras, you have focused not so much on the activity like the processing step, but you were focusing on the stationary description, or?
Yeah, because why? As you know, the task area number 1 divided into 3 subgroups. I am in the group subgroup of reactor design. That's why all my focus tried to be about generally about the reactor and what could be needed around like reactant as a matter, and the units, because I need, for example, to know the concentrations, the temperature, and the surrounding stuff to be able to design it. Anyway, these tables need a lot of work also. Some of them I need to complete. Yeah.
Thanks.
Comment to this, they can be, for example, what Manal does can be in principle, if it's done properly, it can be used like to create the classes of different reactors, for example, and they can be referred to in the general workflow scheme. So, you know, so that you just this way.
Maybe another question. So Manal has worked in OWL mainly, when I understand it right, whereas you, Taras, you have done most of the things in RDF triples, or?
Yeah, where I was trying to make prototyping ontology for general representation of the workflows.
Here, maybe I can add one point, because as you mentioned, Taras used RDF, I used OWL, yes? Because why? Because OWL could give me relational database, while RDF give me semantic database. And here is the difference.
No. It's misleading.
No. RDF is, you can also note OWL in RDF. RDF is just a format how you write things down.
Yeah, it's
like
a data model.
I agree. I agree. For example, they are very close to each other. For example, when we name them the building blocks of ontology, for example, when it comes to OWL, its name is individuals. When it comes to RDF, it's named instances. They are so close. They are somehow very, very close to each other. But this is what I have read in a reference, that this is the division between RDF and OWL.
Yeah, RDF I'm using also, besides RDF, my RDF is based on the vocabulary and the expressivity in the OVL ontology. So that's I use both the RDF, which is based on the vocabulary of a particular OVL file, and this OVL file is kind of, you can call it like the main ontology, and if it's done properly, it can import the ontologies related to the substances, or for example ontologies representing reactors and so on. So that's and then it can be used in RDF representation of metadata. So in principle, reactor ontology can be used like for making instances of reactors of particular type in the RDF workflow file. So you describe a workflow, you say, so you used, for this reaction, you use the reactor which is of type class A, and this class A is described or specified, defined in the reactor ontology. This is technically how it would look like.
Anyway, thank you, Staras, for your comment. Anyway, my point is not to compare between OWL and RDF. My point is just to focus on reactor, and my work on Protege and using OWL ontology was based on the recommendation of the community, like what Alex recommended me, what the community, the workflow of the community. I try to go with the stream of this community. I'm not in the place to evaluate both of them. Yeah.
Will you put your Excel file and the OWL file on the cloud, or?
I will just make some revisions, some addition. I will discuss Alex with them next week, and after that I will upload them and inform the interested people. I will upload everything regarding OWL files. And please, I'd like to say something before I leave. My work, of course, is a trial of building, but my trial, as I told Alex, is not ruled by, for example, when you come to civil engineer, he has rules for building his building, but for us, we are trying to build, to learn how to build. That's why, and also I built based on BFO, and according to many resources, BFO is not complete. That's why I told Alex that the confusing terms for me and the confusing points, I will gather them in a sheet and name them confusing terms, because I was not really able to classify them as it was supposed to reuse BFO, which is in turn not complete. That's why the incompleteness that you might come across later on for those who could take over or something like that, this is the essential reason of it. And as that Japanese professor said, we are trying to standardize our work. The work is not standardized, does not have the standards to follow. For example, in spite of, for example, you can let your reasoner give you a sign of a mistake, but the consistency of ontology or the accuracy of it essentially when it comes to one of the methodologies of building ontology, you need two engineers to build it, which one of them is knowledge engineer and the other one is domain engineer. I try to play the roles of both, and this is not correct, by the way.
Great. So I think this is a good final remark of this meeting. So thank you all, and
Alexander,
also...
we have sorry please for coming into discussion. We have also one point.
Sorry.
Since we are collaborating with TA4, there's some efforts which were done for the preparing of the architecture document. I think if there are some of my colleagues, Vladimir or Preston, maybe they can also add a few words, and maybe I'm not such updated, but the idea is that we will send the current version of the architecture document for other task areas and ask about additions or maybe your comments from your side that we can improve it. So I think that's
Nadia, thank you so much for this very important point that you have raised, because if I don't know if the community remembers, in one of my slides, I mentioned that what I am doing is not one of the two shifting elements. The other shifting elements is the repositories, which are the point of interest of task area number 4. That's why when everything is done regarding task area 1, finished the function or finished job, it will be conveyed to task area number 4. And this is what Nadia have just mentioned.
Just a small addition. It's supposed to be ready by the middle of December, like it will be sent then.
So we would be happy for feedback on that, and if you have some use cases, also would be very nice to get some.
Yeah, I think also those who are interested in curating use cases, especially chemists, please write me a mail.
Also, Taras, I think it would be also nice if you would send this document around in the TA1 mailing list. Then you can make sure that everyone gets it also. Once it is in a publication stage, so to say. So if it's in the case that we can also, as TA1, put input in there, that you maybe just send it via TA1 and ask everyone to give input to that.
So especially be interested in the contribution from chemists. Especially. Yes.
Before we finish this meeting, I just wanted to say goodbye to Manal. Thank you so much for your hard work. I think everybody will miss you here. So we wish you the best, and who knows, maybe we'll see each other again.
Of course, and as a response to your word, I'd like to say I really enjoyed working with you. I learned a lot from you all. I enjoyed working with a very, very nice cooperative community. Thank you so much for you all.
Thank you.
All the best.
Great. All the best. Yes. So before we close today's meetings, I not only want to stop recording, but also to set up for a new date. I think this is not that important for the world after us, so I will just stop the recording now.